It was 7:14 in the evening on a Saturday in June, and I was sitting in the parking lot of Harborview Grill in Annapolis, Maryland, trying to decide if I should go inside alone. My wife had called me 40 minutes earlier, said she couldn't make it, said the grant proposal was due Monday and her department head needed everyone in, said, "Happy birthday, sweetheart. I'll make it up to you. I promise." She said it the way you say things when you've already moved on to the next thought before the sentence is finished. I sat there in the car for a while, 70 years old that day. The reservation was for two. I'd made it 3 weeks in advance because Harborview fills up on weekends, and my wife had told me she wanted to try the place ever since her colleague mentioned the crab cakes. Eventually, I decided I wasn't going to drive home and eat a sandwich on my birthday. I got out of the car and went inside. The hostess seated me at a window table. The water was visible through the glass, dark and flat and calm in the evening light. I ordered a glass of scotch and looked at the menu without really reading it. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with being in a nice restaurant by yourself on a significant occasion. I read about it. I'd never felt it before that night. I was about halfway through my drink when I saw them. They were seated diagonally across the room, maybe 30 feet away, a booth near the back. My wife was leaning forward with both elbows on the table, laughing at something. The man across from her was reaching over and touching her hand. I recognized him immediately. His name was Clifton Beauregard. He was the executive director of the foundation that funded my wife's research program. 60-something, silver-haired, the kind of man whose suits cost more than most people's car payments. I had met him twice at department functions. My wife had mentioned him occasionally. Important donor, passionate about environmental policy, very generous with his time. She was not at work. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the server to come back and ask if I was ready to order. I told him I needed another minute. Everything inside me wanted to stand up, to walk over there, to say something, anything, just to watch both their faces change. That is what every nerve in my body was telling me to do. I had half pushed my chair back when I felt a hand on my arm. It was light, firm, the hand of a woman who had made a decision before she reached me. I looked up. She was perhaps 50, dark hair pulled back, a glass of white wine in her other hand. I had never seen her before in my life. She looked at me steadily and said, very quietly, "Not yet. You want to know the whole thing first. Trust me." Then she sat down in the chair across from me like we had planned it. Her name was Nora. She didn't offer a last name, and I didn't ask. She worked for a firm that handled financial compliance audits, she said. She'd been watching my wife and Clifton Beauregard for over an hour before I walked in. She had recognized my wife from a photograph. I asked her what photograph. She looked at me for a moment before she answered. Then she told me. Clifton Beauregard had been a subject in a private financial investigation, not criminal, civil. His former business partner had hired the firm Nora worked for to trace discretionary accounts following a dispute about distributions from a real estate holding company. In the course of that investigation, they had discovered a pattern of personal expenditures that went beyond the scope of the original engagement. Nora wasn't supposed to be following up on any of it. She was at Harborview that night because Clifton Beauregard was there, and she had reasons of her own for wanting to understand the full picture before she closed her file. She set her wine glass down and looked at me directly. She said, "Your wife has been receiving deposits of $4,000 a month into a personal account, not your joint account, a solo account opened in her name 18 months ago. The deposits come from a holding company that Beauregard controls entirely." I said I didn't understand. She said, "I think you do." The room kept going around us, glasses clinking, a table of people celebrating something, laughing loudly 2 booths over. The soft sound of the water through the window glass. $4,000 a month for 18 months, $72,000. I looked over at the booth. My wife was still leaning forward. She was still laughing. She touched his arm now, not the other way around. Nora asked me if I wanted to handle it tonight or think it through. She said if I wanted to walk over there and confront them, she would understand, but it would accomplish nothing useful. She said, the public scene feels good for about 45 seconds. After that, it's all lawyers and he said, she said, and you've shown your hand to someone with considerably more resources than you. I asked her why she was telling me any of this. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said her mother had been in a situation not unlike mine 20 years ago, and the man involved had walked away from everything without consequence because nobody had thought to document anything before they reacted. She said, I'm giving you the option my father never had. She slid a business card across the table, told me to call her Monday morning if I decided I wanted documentation, said she could legally provide me with records of the deposits because they were relevant to her existing case file and my name appeared on shared financial documents. Then she picked up her wine, stood up, and walked back toward the bar. I sat there for 20 more minutes. I ordered the salmon because the server came back a third time and I didn't know what else to do. I ate maybe 4 bites of it. I watched my wife and Clifton Beauregard finish their dinner, share a dessert, and leave together through the side entrance. She texted me at 9:47, said she was finally heading home, said it had been a brutal few hours, said she'd pick up something from the bakery tomorrow to make up for missing my birthday. I wrote back, no worries, take your time. I have thought about that text many times since then. No worries, take your time. I don't know if I was being strategic or if I was simply too stunned to say anything real. Probably both. My wife's name is Elaine. We had been married for 31 years. We met in graduate school in Chapel Hill, both of us studying environmental science, both of us convinced we were going to change the world. She got her PhD. I spent 28 years as an environmental compliance officer for a mid-sized manufacturing company in Baltimore. Steady work, good benefits, not glamorous, but I believed in what I was doing. We had one daughter, Paige, who was 27 and living in Portland. We had a house in Severna Park that we bought in 1998 and paid off in 2019. We had a retirement account, a joint savings account, a dog named Flapjack, and 31 years of a life built together. And apparently my wife had a separate account I didn't know existed, with $72,000 in it, funded by a man who was touching her hand in a restaurant while she told me she was working late. I called Nora on Monday morning. The records she provided were clear and detailed. 18 months of deposits, all from the same LLC registered in Delaware, BPH Consulting Group, sole officer Clifton A. Beauregard. The account was at a credit union in Annapolis where Elaine had grown up and still had family. Smart. I never would have thought to look there. My attorney, a woman named Patricia Ellison, who had come recommended by a colleague I trusted, looked at the records for about 3 minutes and then looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "This changes the asset picture considerably. Maryland is an equitable distribution state, not a community property state. What that means in plain language is that a judge divides marital assets fairly, which is not necessarily equally. Concealed assets matter. Intentional financial deception matters. The fact that Elaine had been hiding income, and Patricia believed a good argument could be made that those deposits constituted income, not gifts, materially affected what equitable distribution would look like. I also asked Patricia about alienation of affection. I had read about it in the context of states that still allow that kind of civil action. She told me that Maryland had abolished the tort decades ago, which meant I couldn't sue Clifton Beauregard directly for interfering in my marriage. But she said the financial angle was stronger anyway. If we could establish that the payments constituted a financial relationship rather than a purely personal one, the argument became cleaner and more documentable. I spent the next 6 weeks not changing anything on the surface. I went to work. I came home. I had dinner with my wife. I asked her about her day. She told me about grant proposals and board meetings and a conference in Boston she was planning to attend in October. I listened and nodded and said the things a person says. Inside, I felt like I was standing at the bottom of a very deep lake, looking up at the light on the surface, waiting. Paige called on a Sunday and asked how I was doing. I told her I was fine. She said I sounded strange. I told her I was just tired. She said, "Dad, I know your tired voice and that's not it." And I had to put the phone down for a minute and look out the window at the backyard before I could trust my voice again. I did not tell her. Not yet. Patricia filed the divorce petition on a Thursday in early September. Elaine received the papers at her office, which Patricia had recommended, not to humiliate her, but because receiving them at home sometimes produces unpredictable reactions, and it's cleaner to have the initial shock happen in a professional setting. Elaine called me 4 minutes after the process server left her building. She did not ask why, she knew why, which told me she had known this moment was possible and had thought about it. She was crying, but there was something controlled underneath it, something that had been prepared. She asked if there was any chance we could talk first. I told her that was what attorneys were for now. The next 3 months were not simple. I won't pretend they were. 31 years does not dissolve cleanly. There were conversations through lawyers that felt absurd. Two people who had shared a bed and raised a child and buried both sets of parents, communicating through documents and intermediaries. There were nights I sat in the living room with Flapjack and questioned every assumption I had made about the previous decade, trying to identify the point where the marriage had become something I wasn't part of anymore. Elaine hired an attorney who made an early argument that the deposits from Beauregard's LLC were personal gifts between consenting adults and carried no financial obligation or concealment under Maryland law. Patricia anticipated this. The credit union account had been opened using our home address as the primary contact address and then quietly updated to her mother's address in Annapolis 4 months later. That change, documented in the bank's records, demonstrated deliberate concealment. The judge agreed. The final settlement gave me a larger share of our joint retirement accounts to offset the concealed assets. We sold the house in Severna Park. I kept Flapjack. Clifton Beauregard's situation resolved itself separately, and without any action on my part, which is the part that still strikes me as almost too neat to be true. The civil dispute between Beauregard and his former business partner, the one that had originally brought Nora into the picture, went to arbitration in November. In the course of discovery, the BPH Consulting Group accounts came into full view. The arbitrator found that Beauregard had used shared business funds to capitalize the LLC before formally separating it, which constituted a breach of their original partnership agreement. His former partner was awarded a significant judgment. The foundation Beauregard ran, the one that funded my wife's research program, began an internal governance review in January after a board member raised questions about executive discretionary spending. By March, Beauregard had resigned, citing health reasons. My wife's position at the university was not affected by the divorce. I want to be fair about that. She kept her job, kept her research program, continued her work. I don't know what happened between her and Beauregard after everything fell apart around him. I didn't ask, and nobody told me. Paige found out the full story in November when I finally sat down with her on a video call and told her everything from the beginning. She was silent for a long time when I finished. Then she said, "Dad, why didn't you tell me sooner?" I told her I didn't want her to carry it while I was still figuring out whether I could carry it. She flew out from Portland to spend Christmas with me. We stayed at a rental cottage on the Eastern Shore for 4 days. We cooked, we walked along the water, we played cards in the evenings. She brought her boyfriend, a quiet man from Spokane named Terrell, who taught high school history and turned out to be excellent at gin rummy. On the last night after Terrell had gone to bed, Paige and I sat on the small deck with blankets, and she asked me how I was really doing. I thought about it for a while before I answered. I told her I was not entirely sure how to account for 31 years, not how to discount them, not how to pretend they had been something other than what they were. There had been real things in that marriage, A daughter I was immensely proud of. A house where we had done the ordinary, unremarkable work of a shared life. Good years I would not trade away, even knowing what I knew now. I told her the hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. The hardest part was the revision, the way every memory becomes a question. Was this real? Was she actually here for this? You start going back through the catalog of your life together, trying to locate the moment it became a performance, and you can't find it. And that not finding is its own particular grief. She reached over and put her hand on mine and didn't say anything. I told her that the night in the restaurant after Nora walked away and I sat there by myself with my untouched salmon and my scotch and the water dark and flat through the window, that night I had understood something I hadn't understood before, that the way I handled the next hours would be the thing I remembered about myself from this point forward, not what had been done to me, what I did next. I told her I was glad I had stayed in my chair. Paige asked if I had ever reached out to Nora again after everything was settled. I had. I'd sent a brief note through her firm's contact address thanking her. She had responded 3 weeks later with 2 lines. She said she was glad it had worked out. She said her father would have appreciated knowing someone used the option. That was all. There's a thing that happens when you spend 31 years building a life with someone, and then one evening in June, it begins to come apart. People expect you to be angry. They expect to find you bitter, diminished, hollowed out. Some of the men I'd known who had gone through divorces late in life had become those things. I understood how it happened, but here is what I actually felt. Once the paperwork was done and the house was sold and I was in a smaller place in Annapolis by myself with flapjack and a view of the water from the kitchen window, I felt light. Not happy, exactly, not immediately, but light in the way that a room feels light when you finally moved out a piece of furniture you'd stopped noticing was there but had been blocking the window all along. I started getting up earlier. I walked flapjack along the waterfront in the mornings, sometimes for an hour. I signed up for a kayaking class at the community center, which I had been meaning to do for 11 years. I cooked for myself and discovered I was actually reasonably good at it. I called Paige on Sunday evenings, and the conversations were different now. Not briefer, but less performed. More honest, she started telling me things she hadn't told me before, and I did the same. I don't offer this as a happy ending because I don't think that's the right category. I offer it as the true one. I was 70 years old, sitting alone in a restaurant on my birthday, watching my marriage end from 30 feet away over a crab cake and a glass of scotch. A woman I had never met sat down across from me and handed me the choice my wife had taken away. I was grateful then. I am grateful now. Not for what happened, for what I did with it. If you're sitting somewhere tonight and you recognize something in this story, the particular silence of a phone call that ends too quickly, the reservation for 2 that becomes 1, the feeling that you are the last person to understand something everyone else has already accepted. I want you to know that the quiet you're feeling right now is not weakness. It is the moment before the decision. It is the moment before the decision. It is the most important moment. Stay in your chair. Know the whole thing first. The real show hasn't started yet. I've had a lot of time to sit with this. That's one thing about being 70, you stop rushing toward conclusions. You let things settle the way sediment settles in still water, and eventually you can see clearly to the bottom. What happened to me wasn't unusual. Men and women betray each other every day. What I keep coming back to isn't the betrayal itself. It's the chain of choices that led to it and the chain that followed, because nothing in this story fell from the sky. Every consequence grew directly out of a decision someone made, sometimes years before the damage showed. Elaine made choices, small ones at first, I imagine. A conversation that went a little too long, a detail left out of an evening's account, then the account at the credit union in Annapolis. Then $72,000 over 18 months. Each choice made the next one easier, the way a crack in a foundation doesn't announce itself. It just quietly becomes the reason the wall eventually fails. She was a smart woman. She knew exactly what she was doing. And the full weight of that knowing came back to her, not because I engineered it, but because that is simply what happens when a person builds something on a false foundation. It holds until it doesn't. Clifton Beauregard had his own chain, a financial dispute with a business partner, records that existed because he had made choices that left records, an arbitration that uncovered what was already there. He didn't lose everything because of me. He lost it because of the sum of his own decisions, compounding quietly in the background the whole time. I was nowhere near that room when the judgment came down. I didn't need to be. What I want to say to anyone carrying something heavy tonight, and I mean this not as a platitude, but as something I lived, is that intelligence without integrity is just a more efficient way to dig yourself into a hole. Clifton was intelligent. Elaine was intelligent. Neither of them lacked the capacity to understand consequences. What they lacked was the discipline to let that understanding govern their choices. That gap between knowing better and doing better is where most human suffering originates. Nora had the same intelligence, but she used it differently. She could have walked past my table that evening. It would have cost her nothing. Instead, she sat down, at some professional risk to herself, because 20 years earlier, her mother had been in a similar situation and her father had been denied the option of knowing the full picture before he reacted. She carried that. She did something with it. That is what I mean by character. Not the absence of self-interest, but the decision to act beyond it when the moment calls for it. Paige asked me once if I wished I had known sooner. I told her honestly that I didn't know. Earlier knowledge might have meant an earlier reaction, something public, something that felt satisfying for 45 seconds and cost me everything useful afterward. Nora gave me the gift of restraint by giving me information. The two things arrived together, and I needed both. I stayed in my chair that night. I ate 4 bites of salmon. I watched my wife leave through the side entrance with another man on my 70th birthday. And I made a decision, sitting there alone with the water dark and flat through the window glass, that however this ended, I would handle it in a way I could look back on without shame. That decision cost me something in the moment. It gave me everything in the long run. That is not luck. That is not fate. That is the only equation that has ever consistently held. The quality of your choices over time becomes the quality of your life. Paige knows that now. I know it more completely than I did before, and if it took losing 31 years to understand it at this depth, then I will accept that as the price of the education. I am not bitter. I am clear. Those are very different things, and at 70, I'll take clarity over almost anything else.